asking anybody for this information, but I became possessed of the knowledge of how to get a phony ID. So I'm like 14 years old and I've got an ID that says I'm 35. And there was a liquor store in my town that would actually sell to minors on a ridiculous ID like that. And I don't ever remember asking anybody how to do all this, but somehow I became possessed of this knowledge. And, my life changed from the moment I started drinking. Up until that time, I was a straight A student. I went to church on Sundays. I was actually very involved in a church youth group. Within a year, I was getting C's and D's in school, had quit going to church, dropped out of that youth group, had a whole new set of friends. My life changed completely. That first night kind of set the tone for what my drinking was going to look like. As I like to describe it, when I drink, I get real friendly. And so I developed a reputation in high school for being the friendly girl. And that's not the reputation any girl in high school wants to have. I knew people were talking about me and it made me feel bad for sure. But I don't ever remember thinking, gee, maybe if I didn't drink, I wouldn't behave that way. And, people would think better of me. I don't ever remember those thoughts crossing my mind. The idea of quitting drinking then just simply did not enter my mind. My parents sent me away to boarding school my last couple of years of high school because they were very concerned, rightly so, about how, the direction my life was taking. And so they sent me away to this all girls school, and it had the desired effect in that because it was a very structured environment and there were no boys and it was very difficult to get alcohol there, I studied and brought my grades up and graduated successfully. And I went off to a local college, and I just partied my way through that first year of college. I should say my first and last year of college. At the end of that first year of college, I got married. I got married because this boy asked me to marry him. I remember I was 17 years old when he asked me, 18 when we got married. And I remember when he asked me thinking, oh, thank God I won't have to worry about that anymore. Now, I was 17 years old. I was not even really aware that I had been worrying about it. What 17-year-old worries that she might not get married? I mean, it just had never really crossed my mind. And yet I remember that feeling of sort of relief that somebody had asked me. I know today, that I simply had no self-worth at all. I did not know that. Anyway, so we got married, and I remember as the day of the wedding was drawing closer and closer, thinking that I didn't seem to be feeling things that brides to be. I read a lot of books, and in books, brides feel stuff that I did not seem to be feeling. And I kind of worried about that a little. Did I talk to anybody about it? Of course not. Like my mother or somebody? No, I did not. I just kind of thought that maybe I just kind of missed that gene or something. I remember walking down the aisle on my dad's arm at the day of the wedding, thinking as I was walking down the aisle, this might be a mistake. Now, I know that's not what you're supposed to be thinking at that moment. I know that. And yet we were too young and immature and we should never have gotten married. I said that for years. And then after a number of years, I sort of had to amend that a little bit to say, well, he was probably just fine. I was certainly too young and immature to get married, but he was probably just fine. By the time I was sober a long time when it really struck me. The reason I left him is we were never going to be drinking the way I needed to drink already. We were a young married couple. We didn't have much money. We were young married. We had a little apartment and we had bills and we had little jobs, and we would get to our social life was we would get together with 3 or 4 other couples at one of our houses to play cards or something for an evening. And we would buy 1 bottle of wine. Did you catch that? 1 bottle of wine for 6 to 8 people. And we'd mix it with 7-Up to make it stretch. And that's what we would drink over the course of an entire evening. I didn't know anything about alcoholism. I didn't know that was just setting off the craving in me. I didn't know that when I remember coming to AA and maybe my first meeting when they read that line, restless, irritable, and discontent. I knew exactly what they were talking about. That's what I was feeling all this. And so I left him. Why I was leaving, I just knew that I didn't quite know what had happened here, and I couldn't, I wouldn't go. I just said, I'm not coming back. That's it. And when I got sober and made my amends list, because as I said a minute ago, I thought it was just sort of a mutual thing. We were too young. We never should have gotten married, 50-50, no harm, no foul. But after I was sober a good many years, as I said, I came to the realization that it really was me. And so I talked to my sponsor and I said, I realized that I actually owe amends to this first husband of mine. And it's a little embarrassing to say, but I was sober 25 years when this realization came to me. I didn't rush into this realization. And my sponsor said, "Do you know where he is?" And I said, "Yeah, I know where he lives, and he's married and he has some kids who are now, pretty much grown." And she said, "Yeah, I don't think you get to jump into his life to say, oh, by the way, I'm sorry after all these years." She said, "He's married. You don't know what turmoil or feelings you might create in his life by you showing up on his doorstep to say, oh, hey, by the way, sorry." She said that's not the way amends work. That's not even an amend. Amends is making things right. And that's in no way would that be setting anything right. She said, "I would suggest to you that you need to let this go and be willing and able to make amends should God ever drop him in your path, but you don't get to go hunt him down to do it." And so I am today 45, almost 46 years sober, and I haven't seen it from that day to this. It's an unmade amends. I like to mention it when I talk because it's my strong recommendation based on this, that when amends are appropriate, they should be made, obviously with your sponsor's direction and help. But I wish I'd made it, when it was timely and I could have done it. Anyway, so I left him and I moved up to LA, which was 50 miles up the road, and got a job in an apartment. I'm, I guess, 19 years old now, and I am a daily drunk. I'm working as a secretary in a trucking company, and I'm drinking with these truck drivers, and I'm behaving there exactly the way I'd behaved in high school, which is to say, before I left that job less than a year later, I knew many of those truck drivers in the biblical sense, you might say. My father was vice president of that company, which is how I got the job. And apparently word of my behavior was, drifting up to his office. And so he called me one day to talk to me about my behavior. I can't really even think about my behavior sober. Things to him on the phone that day, just so he would hang up and stop talking to me. The end result of that conversation is I quit the job because that's what I do. I quit a lot of jobs. I quit the job and I never spoke to my father again, except twice, once at a wedding, once at a funeral, and then only because we bumped right into each other, and then only very, hey, how you doing, and moved on, until I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous and made my amends to him. It was actually the first amends I made. And as a result of that, I have had a good relationship with my father up until the time he passed away a few years ago. And you gave that to me. Alcoholics Anonymous gave me the relationship with my father. I would never have spoken to him again. I know that. And so I'm so grateful for that. And of course, so much more. So I left that job, and that kind of set the pattern for my career, as it were. I get a job. I'm a very good secretary, so I never have any trouble getting a job, and I'm good at it. And so, how when you're new on a job, you're nervous, so you kind of walk the straight and narrow. And so I would keep my drinking out of the office for a while, 2 or 3 months maybe, until I relaxed. I knew they're happy with me. I'm happy with them. Everybody's happy. So now my drinking is creeping into the workplace. Now I'm drinking at lunchtime. Now I'm drinking after work with the client and the bosses and the coworkers. Now I'm sleeping with everybody or your spouse. I don't care. And so now, obviously, I have created a big, ugly mess at this company, and I must leave. I have never been fired from a job, but I have quit every single job I had until I got sober as a direct result of something that I did while drinking. And I'm not the let's give 2-week notice girl. I'm the one who quits after office Christmas parties without going back to clean out my desk, because I know I cannot face you on Monday morning after what happened Friday night. I know I simply cannot. I did drink a lot in blackouts, and I'm kind of grateful for it. I remember plenty. I don't need more information. I'm sure there is more information, but I know enough, excuse me. I peaked in my career when I was about 23. I got sober when I was 30. I peaked in my career at about 23. I was working as a legal secretary. I was making really, really good money for somebody that age. Obviously had a very bright future in the field. My last job before I got sober, I was working as a clerk in a YMCA. And the main part of that job was if you were a member of that Y and you came in to pay your dues, I'm the person who wrote you the receipt. And I was barely hanging on to that job. I was always hungover, often drunk in there. I drank at lunch often. I tried not to, but I usually did. I would say 60% of the time, at least, I was drinking at lunchtime. Always went back to work. Office from this little bar around the corner, and she said to me, you are really, really drunk. I think you probably shouldn't go back to work. Why don't you go home and I'll cover for you and say you have the flu or something. And that sounded like a good idea. So she walked me to my car. I got in the car, so drunk. I got in the car and I was trying to get the key and the ignition, and I just kept stabbing at it. I couldn't quite. And she said, I keep freezing up. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Should I start at the beginning? No, I'm just joking. So I'm stabbing at the ignition with the key, and she's standing there telling me, come on, you can do it. And I remember thinking, God, this is my best friend. She's sending me off drunk to drive. There's something wrong with this picture. Anyway, obviously I didn't die in a car accident. It just goes from bad to worse. Here's how I drank. I went out with my boss and my coworkers one night, and we were bar hopping around downtown LA, and everybody, I think, in my crowd was drunk. However, it would be safe to say that I was drunker than them all, because when we wound up in the strip club, I was the only one who auditioned for a job. Now, it's not my fault, and I know you'll understand when I explain it to you. We were sitting at this table directly in front of the stage, and I had excused myself from the table to go to the ladies' room, which was down the hall behind the stage. And I bumped into the owner of the bar in the hallway there on the way to the ladies' room. And I was making some derogatory remarks about the caliber of his entertainment. And he said something along the lines of, well, if you think you're such hot stuff, then go for it. So evidently, I, in fact, thought I was such hot stuff. So here we are. Picture this. A moment ago, I was sitting at the table with my boss and my coworkers, dressed in a nice dress that I'd worn to work that day. And moments later, I appear on the stage essentially dressed in nothing. And there was that moment when my boss's eyes and mine met. I will never forget the look on his face. Seriously, I mean, this was well over 50 years ago this happened. Honestly, I can see the look on his face right now like it's happening this second. It's such an indelible memory in my head. That's another job I quit without going back to clean out my desk the next day. Sometimes you just can't face people after this stuff. However, now the next day I was kind of appalled at what I had done. I mean, a strip club, that's pretty bad, very tacky, but it gave me ideas. This was kind of when go-go dancing was a thing. I don't know if it was ever really a thing anywhere, but it was in my crowd. So we'll call it a thing. And in my mind's eye, go-go dancing seemed classier than stripping. Let's be clear, it's not. It's pretty much the same thing. But I convinced myself that it was. And I actually went and found myself a paid job as a go-go dancer. Now, there were a lot of nice clubs on the Sunset Strip that had dancers. I did not work in those nice clubs. I worked in some terrible dives, really some terrible places. I met the man who was to become my second husband there at one of these fine establishments where I was working as a dancer. He was a customer who clearly recognized talent. I can hardly say that without laughing. Dancing ability was not much of a requirement in the kinds of bars that I worked in. And I'm not much of a dancer, really. And he was the most probably inappropriate man in the state of California for me. So of course we moved in together and set up housekeeping and eventually did get married. We had a very romantic wedding. We got married in Las Vegas by a judge who was wearing his bedroom slippers. That's pretty much all I remember about that. So I'm married again, but I'm a full-blown alcoholic. If there was any doubt up until now, there's kind of none now. I mean, I am drunk every single day. I'm working, but I went back to working as a secretary after I got married to him. And Uh, but I'm drunk all the time. All the time. Although I'm married, I'm behaving like I'm still single. So you might imagine that caused some real problems in that marriage. I didn't mean to be an unfaithful wife, but when I drink, all bets are off. When I drink, anything's likely to happen, and it was happening. So we had a lot of trouble in that marriage. I started getting arrested, and I can't believe this is happening to me. I'm a nice girl from Newport Beach. I cannot believe I'm in jail, but I was in jail. I'll tell you about my first arrest. It was on a Thanksgiving night. I had been to Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' home. My husband wasn't invited. I don't think I mentioned my family was quite unhappy about this marriage, to the point that they actually never met him. So he wasn't invited. My husband was a chef at a restaurant in Beverly Hills, and the owner of the restaurant where he worked had a Thanksgiving party for all of the employees of the restaurant at his home. So my husband went to that. I went to my parents' house. I got very drunk at Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. I was driving home, and I needed cigarettes. So I stopped at a bar. Where else would you stop to buy cigarettes? And went in. The bar was on Main Street in downtown LA, which is Skid Row. I can't tell you why I picked that particular bar to buy my cigarettes, but nonetheless, that's where I went to. And of course, I had some more drinks in there, and I came out and I got arrested on Main Street for common drunk. And they took me to Sybil Brand, which was the Women's Institute at the time in LA. And they told me I could make a phone call. And I remembered where my husband was at this party at his boss's house. So I called the boss's house. The boss's wife answered the phone. I identified myself and told her I was in jail. Could she please have my husband come bail me out? It did not occur to me. It would have been nicer to ask to speak directly to him to deliver that news, but it never occurred to me. And yet, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous some years later and heard you talk about making amends, I seriously thought for quite a while, no, I can't really think of anybody that I hurt. Oh my God, if I knew you 5 minutes, I probably hurt you. I am 100% selfish and self-centered, as the big book describes. Anyway, you get the idea. I spent onto that. And, assuming I don't drink at lunchtime, which is maybe I do, maybe I don't, but assuming I got through lunch without drinking, I come home, I remember walking in the apartment, I would put my purse by the door that's sitting on the sink and have a swallow. Once I got that first swallow in me, it's like a big sigh of relief. Okay, now it's okay. Now I can take my work clothes off and get into my purple flannel bathrobe and settle in for an evening of drinking. And at some point in the evening, I get a little nervous when the level of that bottle goes down, and I'm calling the liquor store to deliver a new one. By now, sometimes, when I call the liquor store, I'm already pretty drunk. And by the time they get there with it, the delivery person, I might already be passed out. I was such a good customer of bottle and keg liquor that they would actually leave the bag on my porch because they knew I would be down first thing in the morning to pay them. And I always did. Sometimes my utilities were turned off. I paid late payments on everything, but I never once bounced a check at bottle and keg liquor ever. I was a girl who clearly had her priorities straight. I turned into one of those pathetic people who call people on the phone, drunk. My personal favorite, a boyfriend I had when I was 12. Now I have no idea where this poor guy might be living today. So, and if you're a phone caller, you never do it at 7:30 in the evening. It's always 2 or 3 in the morning. And I have no idea where he's living now. So I woke up several other people and I found him. And I'm just sure he and his wife were just thrilled to hear from me. He never called back though. Anyway, you get the idea. One night I called Alcoholics Anonymous. I was drunk when I called. Real nice man answered the phone at central office and asked me if I was having a problem with alcohol. I said that I was, and I started to cry, but I was drunk enough. I was embarrassed about that, but I was drunk enough that I stayed on the phone anyway. And he talked to me quite a while, and he wanted to send some women to my house. And I said, oh, no, thank you. I don't think I'm that bad. And he seemed to understand that. He said, do you think you could not drink tomorrow and go to a meeting tomorrow night? And I said, yes. Now, actually, I doubt very much that I cannot drink tomorrow. I drink every day, but obviously yes is the right answer here. So yeah, you bet. And so he gave me an address and We hung up. I continued to drink. I passed out eventually. I came to the next morning and I remembered making the call and I remembered bits and pieces of it. And I found the address of the meeting place. In the light of day, I was pretty sure I'd been a little premature about calling AA. I was 30 years old. I'm almost certain that's too young to be an alcoholic, but I could not get it out of my mind all day. And I heard myself say to my husband at the dinner table, I'm going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous tonight. He said something like, yeah, whatever. We were not getting along, hadn't been getting along in a long time. And he went off he was a gambler, so he was gone a lot at night. He went off to the racetrack or wherever gamblers go. And I went to my first meeting. I had no idea what was about to happen to me. My first meeting was in the basement of a church in Santa Monica. There were probably 300 people there. It might as well have been 30,000 people. When I saw them all walk at 8:28, sometimes I'm already passed out. So suffice to say, I was not feeling very well when I hit the door of that meeting hall. There was a man standing at the door when I got to the door who put out his hand and said, hello, my name is Clint. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it made me feel welcome. I think it's the single most important thing anybody ever does in a meeting. He shook my hand and I went in the room. Now it's 8:29 and everybody's milling around looking for their seats and talking and laughing, you know how we do. And a man came out of the crowd and asked me if I was new. And I couldn't imagine how he knew that. Of all those people, how did he know that I was new? And I acknowledged that I was. And he got me a seat in the back of the room in a big book. And the meeting started. It was a speaker meeting, much like this one. And a man by the name of Norm Alpe spoke that night. And I heard him. I identified. I believed that he drank the way I drank. I could see that he was sober. I could see that he was this happy, joyous guy. I think I believed maybe that night that maybe there was some hope that I could stay sober, but I knew I would never feel the way that guy feels. You can't get from here to there. You know, there's no way I will ever feel happy like that guy. But of course, what I got that night was just enough hope to keep me coming back. I drank a couple more times that next week. And then I called a woman who'd given me her phone number at the meeting. And I was drunk when I called her and she said, you might want to get a sponsor. You don't seem to be doing too well on your own. And I said, I don't know what a sponsor is and I don't know how to get one. And she said, I'll be your sponsor. She said, bring your big book and meet me early tomorrow night before the meeting and we'll talk about it. And so I did that. First thing she did is she opened my big book to the front cover and told me to write that day's date in there. I wrote that date in there. She said, that's your sobriety date. I remember thinking, oh man, I don't think I should have done this in ink. I'm very happy to report that that is my sobriety date, August 28th, 1975. Next thing she did is she took the meeting directory and she circled the meeting for every night of the week. I couldn't believe it. I stopped her about midweek and I said, I'm so sorry, but I can't do this. I'm married. My husband is very unhappy I'm at this meeting tonight. I certainly can't start going to one every night. He would never stand for it. And she said something like, well, it doesn't really matter if he likes it or not. She said, it actually doesn't matter if you like it. She said, I guarantee you, if you do this, your life is going to change. For me, I believe the miracle happened in that conversation. I can't even believe today, that I agreed to do what she was asking me to do because I knew it was going to cause me a lot of trouble at home, and it did. But I agreed. If you're new at this meeting, this is an important point here. I didn't agree happily, and I definitely didn't do it happily for a long time, but I did it. And that's why I'm still here 45 years later. I started going to meetings every night, and I was right. My husband didn't like it. He thought I was coming here to meet men. Now, it's true that I had been cheated with some of you handsome gentlemen. However, none of you seemed to be interested in me, which hurt my feelings quite a bit. And it really made me mad that my husband was accusing me of something that I was not actually doing right at that minute. So I felt really sorry for my I learned the most important thing I've learned right up to this minute. When I was about 3 or 4 months sober, I was at my meeting and I was crying, whining around the room. And, I would cry to anybody who would listen to me about how sad and tragic my life was. So this guy, Larry, said to me, hi, Pat, how are you? And I started to tell him, how I was with great dramatic sobs. And he cut me off in mid-sentence. He said, I don't want to listen to that. Why don't you go find a newcomer to talk to? Perhaps you'd feel better. And he pointed to a girl across the room. He said, that girl over there in the red dress is at her very first meeting. Why don't you just march over and say hello? I remember clearly thinking that I did not care if the girl in the red dress lived or died. I wish Larry would die and mind his own business, but I knew if I didn't do it, he would tell my sponsor. So shouldn't take but a moment. I'll just go over and say hello to this girl, keep my sponsor off my back. Went over and put my hand out, introduced myself. And the girl who had 12-stepped her, who I knew, said, oh, Pat, I'm so happy to see you. It's this girl's first meeting, and she had this big fight with her husband about coming to AA. And I've been waiting for you because I knew you were the exact right person to talk to her. No, I don't think so. I think I'm possibly the worst person in the room to talk to her. I fight with my husband every night about coming to AA. I got nothing of value to share here. I was sober 3 or 4 months. That was kind of valuable. I kind of overlooked that part. But all I could see was how sad and tragic it all was for me. But as I'm thinking that, I didn't say any of that. I thought it. And as that thought is going through my mind, the thought also shot through there. This girl is at her very first meeting. I should try to say something positive here. So I said, keep coming back. It gets better a day at a time. Now I've just lied to a newcomer because it's not getting better as near as I can tell. Well, I mean, it's better. I'm sober. But I couldn't see any of the good stuff. All I could see was how sad it all was. But something happened to me that night. I turned and walked. I know I didn't talk to her more than 30 seconds because I simply wouldn't have. I was walking back down the center aisle of this big meeting hall, and I had this moment. I literally stopped in my tracks because it's like God reached down and kind of tapped me on the head to get my attention. I don't know how else to describe this moment. And I realized it was the first time in that 3 or 4 months that I was sober, in that period of time from the time I hit the door of the meeting hall until the meeting actually starts, that I was there and I wasn't crying. And the reason I wasn't crying is for this brief little moment, I thought about somebody besides myself. For this little moment, I tried to say something to this girl who was newer than me, and I felt better. It turns out when I'm thinking about you, I'm not thinking about me. And anytime I'm not thinking about me, I feel better. Excuse me, I just took a drink of water there. You can't see that. So I thought I should tell you about the little pause in the conversation here. So all the time. It works all the time. I started taking these steps, and I'm bumbling my way through them, and I'm fighting with my husband all the time. And I'm thinking, the problems in my marriage are now his fault because I'm working this spiritual program now. It can't be my fault anymore. I was not exactly working a spiritual program at home. I mean, I was sober, but that was about it, my life was a mess. I was so into my own head. With an attitude like that, of course, it was inevitable I would meet a man in a meeting who looked good to me. Actually, I'd met a number of men who looked good to me, but one who actually looked back. I was 10 months sober. The gentleman in question was about 10 minutes sober. I saw him when he came in the room the first time. He had a Fu Manchu mustache and a shaved head. Oh, my heart started to pound. I literally leapt across a chair to introduce myself to him. And my sponsor noticed and beckoned me over to her side and said, let's not forget, Pat, you're a married woman. I said, yeah, but I'm really unhappy. And she said, nonetheless, you're married. And as long as you're married, I expect you to act married. Well, I was obsessed with this man. I mean, come on, why would God get him sober in my home group if he didn't mean for us to be together? It was so clear to me. I don't know why she couldn't see that. His sponsor didn't see it either. But where there's a will, there's a way. I think of this as the death dance now. It starts with deep, meaningful glances at each other across the meeting hall room. And then we were kind of brushing up against each other in the coffee line. And then he's walking me to my car after the meeting. And then I'm parking further and further away from the meeting. It's a little complicated to get together. I'm a married woman. Clearly, we're not going to my place. He's a newcomer. He doesn't even have a place. But we're very resourceful people. We can make anything happen. I was at the time working in a record company in Hollywood, and he was very conveniently working in Hollywood as well, right down the street at a porn bookstore. Kind of a good newcomer job, I think. I arranged a long lunch hour at work one day for somebody to cover for me, and he didn't have a car either. So I picked him up at the bookstore, and we went to a motel, and let's just say we got to know each other better. I drove him back and dropped him off at his bookstore later that afternoon. I was driving back to my office, and it occurred to me in the car that I was 10 months sober, and I was living exactly the way I had always lived. I'd been sitting in meetings for 10 months, hearing you say pretty much every night that I was going to have to change everything about the way I've been living my life, or I was most certainly going to drink. And I knew that was the truth. And I knew I was in a lot of trouble. I will say this, out of all the years that I've been sober, that day is the closest I've been to picking up a drink. I was also terrified to tell my sponsor, because she had been quite clear in her direction about this matter, but I don't want to drink. And so that night I told my sponsor what I had done. And she said, Pat, I don't think you're a woman who can cheat on her husband and stay sober, and you don't have to live that way anymore. If you to live that way. Wanting has never changed a thing in my life, ever. I didn't see how you were going to help me, how Alcoholics Anonymous was going to help me. I didn't see any hope that anything was ever going to change. But here's what I did. A day at a time, I stayed away from that guy. A day at a time, I didn't drive by the bookstore or call him on the phone or take his calls when he called me. A day at a time, when I saw him in meetings, I shook hands with a locked elbow. If you're new, that means we never got closer than the entire length of my arm. Hello. And I kept moving. I thought I should explain to him what was going on here. I ran that idea by my sponsor, and she said, oh, no more conversations. He'll get the idea. And so, I heard really for the first time the line that is read in almost every meeting I've ever been to: half measures avail us nothing. And I knew for me, this was going to be the big make it or break it issue. I knew for me, if I did not find a way to change how I was living my life, that I was absolutely going to drink. And so I followed my sponsor's direction 100%. I simply stayed away from that guy. Now, the obsession, of course, passed. Obsessions always pass. But the really good news, and the part that I never dreamed would happen, is I don't live that way anymore. Now, I'm sure you're looking at me. Well, you're not looking at me, but you saw me earlier and you're thinking, well, of course you don't live that way anymore. You're 76 years old, for God's sake. So just to be clear, I haven't lived that way since then. And what a gift. What an absolute gift that is. I never dreamed that I could come here and change everything about my life. I like to tell that story for another reason. I mentioned, I think, that when I went off to be with that fellow that day, that I had my friend at work cover for me because I'm taking this long lunch hour. She knew where I was going and what I was doing. In fact, we talked about it after I got back to the office. About a year later, sometime later, I got another job, but I stayed in touch with her and we'd have lunch occasionally. And then about a year later, I heard through a third mutual friend that this first lady's husband had developed a bad drinking problem, and she had taken him to some church in the hopes that his drinking problem might be resolved. And when I heard that, I thought, wow, that's weird. I wonder why she didn't go to Al-Anon or take him to an AA meeting. I told her a lot about AA. We talked about it a lot. Yeah, but what I showed her about AA is that it's a place where people cheat on their spouses. I don't imagine she would be too excited for her husband to go there. It really made me think for the first time about the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. Up to that point, I had sort of vaguely thought, yeah, they're important to the group or AA as a whole, but it was all kind of vague. But I am part of the group. I am part of AA as a whole, and I have an obligation to uphold these traditions. Our 12th tradition says this is a program of attraction. I did not make it an attractive place for that family to go. It really, really made me aware of the fact that if I'm going to let people out there know that I am a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I have an obligation to behave in a way that would make it an attractive place for them to come, or to send somebody that they love, or to recommend to a friend. So I feel pretty strongly about that. Anyway, let's see, where am I going here? My first sponsor drank when I was a year and a half sober. I got a new sponsor right away. And she said to me, I've watched you whine and complain about your husband. You owe a lot of amends to that guy. And the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is pretty clear about these difficult amends. You can't go home and start confessing infidelities he doesn't know about. That's not exactly an amend. Amends is about making things right. She said, I would suggest to you that you might try acting like you're a kind and loving wife. Just pretend that you're a kind and loving wife. Do the kinds of things a kind and loving wife might do. Treat him with courtesy and kindness and consideration and so on. And She said, I don't know what'll happen to your marriage. Maybe you will have to walk away from it at some point, but I think if you do this in the meantime, you might be able to make some daily living amends there. And if you do have to walk away, you might be able to do it without guilt. Well, that got my attention because of course I had a lot of guilt. And so I started following her direction, and I started watching couples in AA, how they treat each other. I have to say we have bad and good examples here. I tried to take the good stuff home and practice it in my home. And she gave me some real specific things to do, and I did them. And it always sounds really fast when I'm talking about it in a meeting. I'm just, in the last 3 sentences, I've covered like probably 5 or 6 months of doing this. And then one night I'm on my knees and I'm thanking God for my sobriety. And I realized I'm comfortable in that home with that husband. And it didn't happen that day. It had already happened. This was the biggest problem in my life. And I kind of missed that it had gone, you know. I got back down on my knees and I said, God, I believe if you mean for me to stay married to this man, I could do that, man. I could do that and stay sober and have a happy life. Thank you. Not long after that, we found out that he had cancer. He was sick for 1.5 years and he did die. It was a tough 1.5 years, but it was also the best 1.5 years of our marriage. I was so grateful that I had stayed when all of my best judgment suggested that I should just leave and get out. I'm so glad that I stayed. I'm so glad that I was there and believable. You know what I'm saying? That he knew that I was there because I wanted to be there, not just because he was sick and needed help, but because I had consistently to be there. They didn't know him. They knew me. And I realized that day that what my sponsor had promised had happened. I felt sad, obviously, that day, but I also knew that I had 100% made my amends to him. And I was so grateful that I had stayed, so grateful. And I remember thinking that's the payoff for doing the work, you know, to have this good feeling of knowing that I 100% made those amends. But here's the thing. That's not even close to the payoff. God's vision for me, and presumably for you too, is so much greater than anything I can ever imagine at any given moment. With regard to that husband and how that all happened, you know, after he passed away, I started dating a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Vince, a couple of you on this meeting knew him. We fell in love and got married, and we were together almost 30 years, and we had a fabulously wonderful, good marriage, which would not have been possible for me. I know 100% would not have been possible for me had I not learned the tools there with my former husband. You see what I mean about God's vision? I also know that I would not have attracted a man of Vince's quality had I not been willing to do that work. You know, I know that beyond a shadow of a doubt. I'm glad that I've always been willing, not happily willing, but willing and doing it nonetheless to follow directions and suggestions that I've gotten from my sponsor, because she has never steered me wrong. You know what I mean? Every direction or suggestion I've ever gotten from my sponsor has led me to greater happiness in the long run. Never quite as soon as I want it. You know, if my sponsor gives me a direction today, I want to, and I do it, I want to feel better by tomorrow. And it's never kind of worked that way for me. It's, you know, but I incorporate that action into my life, and somewhere down the road, I can't even see all the benefits of that, you know, come to bear for me. You know, I love how God shows up in my life at little moments when I least expect it and kind of when I most need it. And I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. When I was about, 10 years sober, Vince and I lived in Pasadena, and I worked in Century City. So I had to drive down the Pasadena freeway, past Dodger Stadium, through downtown LA, and circle around to my office. And it's Los Angeles traffic, you know, so it was always terrible every single morning. Of course, it was awful. So every morning, excuse me, hold on, swallow water here. Every morning on the freeway, just before Dodger Stadium, the traffic would slow to a complete stop. And then it would just sort of creep around through downtown LA every single day, every day. So every day I'm in my car, I'm clutching the steering wheel, I am cursing the traffic. Why is this always happening to me? Like it's a surprise, or like it's not happening to everybody. You know, it's all about me. And I'm cursing the traffic the whole rest of the way to work. And so, of course, by the time I get to work, I'm in a terrible humor. And aren't they happy to see me? You know, it's just awful. I did it for the better part of a year, every day, until One day I'm driving to work, and sure enough, as I get a little bit before Dodger Stadium, the traffic slows to a complete stop. I'm already tensed up and ready for my, to go into my little song and dance here. And I happen to glance over to the right. Down the embankment of the freeway is Figueroa Boulevard, and across Figueroa is a bar that I worked in as a go-go dancer. I just came from a really nice house in Pasadena where the mortgage is current. There's a husband there who loves and respects me. I'm in a decent car. I'm going to a job where they think I'm really great. I started to cry sitting in the car that day. I felt so, so grateful for my life. It is the last time I cursed that traffic. I used to, after that, kind of look forward to getting to that spot so I could look over there and have a little moment, of remembering. I'm so glad God gives me those opportunities to for gratitude. I'm sober a long time, and so I sometimes take this all for granted. It's like, yeah, I'm sober a long time. Life is great. It's all good. It's not always all good. Life happens here. My husband Vince, who I mentioned, we were married, we were together for 30 years, passed away a number of years ago, and my heart broke. It just broke. I didn't know that I could feel as sad as I felt for as long as I felt, and yet never once did the idea of picking up a drink cross my mind. Just kept marching along, and my home group people surrounded me and kind of carried me along on the days when it seemed kind of hard for me to do it, and I got through it. I'll talk about another little experience here. I have a little bit of time. After Vince died, I worked a couple more years, and then I retired from my job, and I moved. I currently live in Palm Desert, and I moved out here. This is actually where Vince and I had planned to retire. And so I moved out here, and I've always meant to do a little more exercise. I've always been a bit of a couch potato, and I always meant to do some exercise, but I never could quite get it done. I just never did. But now I'm retired, and there's really no excuse, for not doing something. I have all the time in the world. So I started going for little walks. And a friend of mine, Linda, who is a big backpacker, said to me, "Have you ever heard of the Camino de Santiago?" And I said, "No." And she said, "I want you to go home and Google it. And then I want you to call me and let's talk." So I said, "Okay." So I Googled it and I called her and I said, "I want to do this." The Camino de Santiago, for those of you who are not familiar, is a spiritual pilgrimage in Spain. It's a 500-mile walk. You actually start in southern France. You cross the Pyrenees Mountains the first couple of days, and then you walk all across northern Spain. The culmination of the pilgrimage is the cathedral in Santiago, where apparently the bones of St. James are buried. I believe if you're Catholic, this is important. I don't happen to be Catholic. This started as a spiritual pilgrimage for Catholics hundreds of years ago. It has evolved over the years into a spiritual pilgrimage for people of all faiths, and in fact, some people of no faith at all. And I started reading blogs and books of people who've done it, and they all kind of talk about this spiritual experience of doing this pilgrimage. And I said to Linda, I want that. I want that spiritual experience. I'm in. And she said, "Pat, it's 500 miles. This means we're going to be hiking, give or take 20 miles a month. You're going to have to train pretty hard." And I said, "I am willing to do that. I want to do this." So she said, "Okay, I will train you." Okay, great. Our plan was to do it a year from the date that we're having this conversation. She said, so she takes me out for my first day of training. In my defense, it was a very hot day. I just have to say that. And I believe it was about a 2-mile. I hesitate to even quite call it a hike because there was like no elevation gain whatsoever, as I recall, maybe a little, but we're almost back to the car and I'm done. I'm like done. There's a big rock by the side of the trail and I've kind of collapsed on this rock and I've got my head between my knees and I'm whimpering. I've drunk all my water, all her water. She's standing next to me and she's saying, "Pat, the car's right over there. It's just, I can see it from where we're standing." And I said, I can't, I'm done. Eventually she got me off that rock and got me back to the car. And make a long story short, a year later, I found myself laying in a little hotel in southern France, looking out the window at the Pyrenees Mountains where we're going to be hiking tomorrow. And I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I've trained hard enough to be here. I can't believe that I've overcome untold numbers of fears. I'm in France right now. I'm going to be in Spain tomorrow. I don't speak either language. You know, I'm afraid of everything. I can't believe I've overcome all these fears and I'm here. This is the most fantastic thing. And there was an electrical storm going on in the Pyrenees Mountains that night. And I don't mean an occasional stroke of lightning. I mean lightning. It was terrible. It was just constant. I'm thinking we're going to die tomorrow, you know, by a lightning strike. Linda is a fabulous photographer. She's hanging out the window going, oh, it's so beautiful, and taking pictures. And anyway, the next day off we went. And the third day we had gone about, 14 or 15 miles, and we stopped to rest and have a little something to eat. And we got refreshed and we got back up, put our backpacks back on and started off again. And she was hiking a little bit ahead of me. And I said to her, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I trained hard enough to do that. Just everything I just said, you know, this is the most fantastic thing that's ever happened to me. About 5 minutes later, I fell on my face down a steep rocky hill. And to make a long story short, it ended the trip. It was actually a very sad ending. Her niece drowned that very same day back at home. So we both wound up coming home together. We came home, and all my friends, of course, said things to me like, oh, Pat, I'm so sorry you didn't get your spiritual experience. I totally got my spiritual experience. I had it there on the trail 5 minutes before I fell. It turns out, and I should have known this, you can't plan when I go, I'm going to have a spiritual experience. They don't work that way. You know, they just don't work that way. I absolutely had a spiritual experience. People often ask me, do you think you'll ever go back and finish the trek? And my answer is probably, I've learned to say never, but the answer is probably not, because I got what I was looking for there. You know, I really did. And I also, the most wonderful thing that came out of that is I'm a hiker today. I'm a hiker. I hike almost every day. I hiked this morning before this meeting because it's what I love to do. And that's, you know, my friend Linda gave that to me. I like to mention her name. She passed away a couple of weeks ago, and that makes me very sad, but boy, she gave me a lot. You know, she really gave me a lot. If you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, I want to welcome you here. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I hope that you stay. I hope if you hear nothing else, you hear that I live a happy, joyous, contented life because of my participation in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for that, I am so grateful. Thank you so much for having me.